All right, if you would turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 1, and I've been, this evening, Lord willing, we'll finish our series on the seven churches, and but this morning I wanted to start a new series, and we'll just do the part of the introduction this morning. I'll have more next time, but we'll be moving this series to Sunday evening next week. Just wanted to get a little bit out there on this. We're going to study the book of Matthew, and we're going to go through the whole book. We went through the book of Mark this past year. It might have been last year. I don't remember. It's been a while, but it's not that long ago. Anyway, I would like to at some point go through all four of the books of the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Lord willing, we'll get there. But we'll start with Matthew, and we're going to read the genealogy here of Joseph. I guess if you want to use a text for this morning for our introduction, the first this genealogy, as it's called, the first verse. There's two verses here we'll use for our text verses. One, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, is where it starts. And then verse 16 tells us which side of the family this is on. And really, this lineage is not, let's read verse 16. Verse 16 says, And Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. We know by reading the rest of this book that Joseph was not Jesus' father. He tells us that later in this chapter. But this gives a history of Joseph, so that there's, I believe it's because the Lord wanted us to see that that Joseph also was of the lineage of David. Even though he wasn't Jesus' father, he still was of the lineage of David. There was no discrepancy in any prophecy here at all. When you go to the book of Luke, which we'll eventually go through the book of Luke, you see Mary's generations, her genealogy, and you see she traces back to David also. So remember, when was it? Might have been in our Thanksgiving study. I can't remember. A few services ago, we talked about David. It was when we were reading about King Saul in our series there. King Saul, of course, being of the tribe of Benjamin, and David being of the tribe of Judah. And we know that Christ is one of his names or titles is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So he comes from the tribe of Judah, which is in David's lineage, and not King Saul. So we're going to begin here, and we're going to get through verse 17 today. We'll pick up with verse 18 next time, but we're going to get through this genealogy, and there's not going to be a lot that we're going to say about this. This is going to be a short sermon this morning. A lot of these names you may not see anywhere else in the Bible but right here. So there's not a lot of information on these people, other than the fact that they were in the lineage of Joseph. Verse 1, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. And so he says Judas here, but he's if you go back, well, I don't want to go back. Well, yeah, let's go back. Let's see. Genesis, I believe this is in Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. Hope I'm right on this. And that's not where I was what I was looking for. Yes, it is Jacob. So this, you have Jacob who begat Judas, and if you go to went back too far. The sons of Jacob. That's what I'm looking for. Sons of Jacob. Well, that's more than I want to read. If you look in Genesis chapter 29 and 30, you see the names, the lineage of those who were of Jacob, and the 4 different women he had children with. Remember, he had his 2 wives. He had Rachel and Leah, and the 2 sisters, and then their handmaidens. He had children by them also. But and that's not the list I was looking for. But anyway, Judah was one of Jacob's sons, and his brethren, it says he was. So Judas would translate into Judah, the words where we get the tribe of Judah is from. Judas begat Phares and Sarah and Zerah and Zerah of Thamar, and Phares begat Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram, and Aram begat Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Nason, and Nason begat Nason begat Salmon, and Salmon begat Boaz of Rachab, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. Now, here's some names we begin to recognize. Boaz and Ruth. Remember, Boaz begat Obed. That was his son from Ruth. Remember, Ruth had been married before, and as far as we know, Ruth had no children from her first husband. And remember, he had died in a foreign land. He was a Hebrew. She was not. She was a Gentile, remember? Boaz, on the other hand, was a Hebrew. He was her kinsman redeemer, as we know it. He was the picture of Christ in that story. Obed was the father of Jesse. Now, who was Jesse? Remember that name? Jesse was David's father. And remember, David was the youngest of his brothers. You ever noticed, maybe that would be a good study, I think, for us sometime, would be to go through and see how many in the lineage of Christ, how many of those people, those men, were not the oldest in the family. Because by Jewish tradition, by Hebrew tradition, I should say, by Hebrew tradition, and especially in the Old Testament, and I believe it's still that way today with the Jews, is that the oldest inherited everything. Now we know in God's plan, his son, Christ, Jesus Christ, is the oldest, if you want to put it that way. He is the only begotten Son of God the Father. He's not adopted in like we are. But being the oldest, he inherits everything, and we are co-inheritors with him. But in their day and time, and it went by according to the law, the oldest was to redeem it, was to inherit his father's, or at least the largest portion of his father's possessions at his father's death. However, here we see King David is the youngest of his father's sons. He was just a lowly shepherd boy. His brothers had gone off to war. He had been left behind to take care of the sheep. And yet he's the one that God used the most out of that family. And Jesse begat David, the king, and David, the king, begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. Remember that? Solomon was the son of Bathsheba, who, at least when David and Bathsheba first met, were not legitimate. And remember that son that was born unto them died because of what had happened, because of the sin that was committed there. And Solomon was next. Solomon begat Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begat Abiah, and Abiah begat Asa, and Asa begat Josaphat, and Josaphat begat Joram, and Joram begat Ozias, and Ozias begat Joatham, and Joatham begat Achaz, and Achaz begat Ezekias, and Ezekias begat Manasseh, and Manasseh begat Amon, and Amon begat Josias. Now remember, all of these that followed Solomon were in the line of Solomon were kings, but they were often wicked kings, were they not? Remember Rehoboam, when the king that was the son that was after Solomon, that became king of Israel after Solomon's death, split the kingdom, or the kingdom split because of him. Josias begat Jeconias and his brethren about the time they were carried away to Babylon. Now we see another milestone here. We see different levels, different milestones here in the genealogy here. First you saw Abraham with his sons, his son and grandson and great-grandson. And then you skip down and you see Boaz and Ruth. And then you see David, Jesse and David. And now you see Solomon and his descendants. And now you see the captivity by Babylon, a major milestone in the story of the nation of Israel. And I believe it's another attempt, even though we know God was in control of that situation, it was another attempt by Satan to eliminate the lineage. You think about that. You know, Satan knew the scriptures left and right. He knows the scriptures probably better than all of us put together. He's been here longer than we have. He's read them more than we have. He's lived them. You want to get down to it? He's lived them because he's been there. Part of his plan all along, or his main part of the plan all along, has been to try to stop the birth of the Messiah. He didn't know when he was coming for sure. He knew the prophecies, but every opportunity he got, he tried to stop the lineage. And I believe that the captivity in Babylon, he took advantage of that situation. And remember, what did Nebuchadnezzar do? One of the things he did was try to wipe out all of the royalty. Part of the reason that they made eunuchs out of the young men that came out of the family of the king was to stop the lineage. You wanted to stop the lineage of the king, so there would be no more claim to the throne. Well, guess what? They failed. God had a plan, and he kept to it, and he's kept to it all along. And after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah beget Shealtiel, and Shealtiel beget Zerubbabel. Where we heard Zerubbabel before. Remember in Ezekiel's day. Oh, not Ezekiel's day, Ezra's day. And Zerubbabel beget Abuad, and Abuad beget Eliakim, and Eliakim beget Azor, and Azor begets Sadok, and Sadok beget Achim, and Achim beget Eliad, and Eliad beget Eleazar, and Eleazar beget Mathan, and Mathan beget Jacob. And let's stop there for a moment. If you notice, after Zerubbabel, there's several generations there of people that were never kings. Zerubbabel was not a king. He was a governor. There were, after the time of the captivity, there were no more kings in Israel until Christ came himself. And he would be the next king, and will be the next king over Israel. And Jacob beget Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Now notice, it does not call Joseph Jesus' father, does it? It says he was the husband of Mary. And who was Mary? She is the one who Jesus was born to. Not to Joseph, but to Mary. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. Kind of wonder why did the Lord start with Abraham? Why did he not go all the way back to Noah or all the way back to Adam with this genealogy? Well, I believe it's because Abraham is where the promise started. Remember, Abraham, you start with the story of Abraham in the book of Genesis, and you see that's the first time God begins to make a promise to men that he's got a Messiah coming. That there's someone coming, and now they all believed. Remember, you had people who were saved. Remember Abraham. It appears Abraham was he was a Gentile. He was a pagan in the beginning, but at some point the Lord came to him and saved him. And even that was before God gave the promise to him, though, wasn't it? So what about those who were before Abraham? Were they not saved the same way? Well, certainly they were. They knew there would be a Messiah, but there was no promise of when he was coming. Abraham was given the promise. He's coming. There's going to be one coming. There's going to be a nation that's going to be of your seed, and that Messiah is going to be coming out of that nation. He wasn't going to come out of the nation of whatever was out there, the Ur of the Chaldees, or he wasn't going to be out of where the Babylonian Empire, the old Babylonian Empire, of where the Tower of Babel was. Nimrod had the city that Nimrod had built. He wasn't going to be out of those, was he? He had to come out of the lineage of Abraham and David. And you notice things the prophecies really ramp up a bit with King David, because all of a sudden you got a king. And now, in the story anyway, now the Messiah will be heir to the throne of Israel. The throne of David. Why do they say David? Because David was God's first king of Israel. Now we read the story of Saul, part of the story of Saul, and we know that Saul was the first king of Israel. But he was chosen by the people. not by God. He was demanded of by the people, not by God. God had a plan for them, and their first king was going to be David. And David was a good king. His son Solomon, for the most part, was a good king. After that, it fell apart. Starting with Solomon, they got up into paganism, didn't they? They got to following false doctrines and false religions because of the wives and concubines that Solomon brought into the country. And it wasn't, you can't really blame not just Solomon for it, because the people didn't stand up and say no, did they? They didn't hold their king accountable. You know, today, well, we have a president, not a king like some want to claim. But if we don't like him, we vote him out in 4 years, don't we? It can be a rough 4 years. We've seen that recently. It can be a rough 8 years if he stays in there two terms. But we have the option to vote him out. With the king, you don't. You can't vote him out. You can run him off. You can overthrow him. But Christ, we need to remember, Christ is in the lineage. His earthly body, anyway, was in the lineage of David. And it can be easily traced back through the genealogy here. It's again in Luke with Mary's lineage. It's traced back to the same place. Next time, we'll give a little bit more history on Matthew, the man himself, and where he lived and where he was from, and remember Matthew's known as the tax collector. We'll look into that. And then, of course, at some point we'll get into the rest of this chapter on the birth of Christ. And we've looked at these verses over and over again many times, and seen the discrepancies with what the world celebrates coming up this time of year, this next month. And we'll look at that when we get to it. So that's all